What kind of foreman charges his own crew just to use safety gear? Elias Rourke tossed the hard hat into the back seat of his rental car, jaw clenched. The thought kept bouncing around in his head like a nail gun misfiring. But he hadn't seen it with his own eyes yet, just heard whispers. And whispers weren't enough. 15 construction sites. That's what he'd built. From a rented garage and a beat-up old pickup 15 years ago to a chain of job-ready construction crews known for fast, clean work. But lately something felt off. Missed deadlines. Crew turnover. A couple of decent guys he remembered from early days had quit quietly. And just last week, a client mentioned the crew at Site 12 seemed stressed out and under-equipped. Elias had never been to Site 12. It was in Bakersfield, 4 hours from his main office. That branch had opened 2 years ago when they expanded into new territory. He'd hired a local district manager to handle things and trusted him to staff it. He never met the foreman in person, and that was the problem. So Elias made a call, used a hiring agency to get himself on the roster as Eli Rowe, a new temp trying to get back into the trades after a stint driving trucks. He grew out his beard, dyed his hair a darker brown, and wore thick glasses. At 52, with a little added weight and a slower walk, he looked like any other guy trying to earn a paycheck. He showed up at the Bakersfield site at 6:30 sharp. A dusty field with half a residential complex framed out. Trucks everywhere. Dust in the air. And a crew of around 20 already gathering, drinking coffee out of travel mugs and stretching their backs. A man with a wide chest and a sharp tongue stood on the flatbed of a truck barking orders. "Let's move, gentlemen. You're on my time now. New guy, get your gear from the shed. You don't get a vest, hard hat, and gloves. You don't step on my site. Understood?" Elias nodded and headed to the small rusted shed parked near the fence. Inside, another worker, maybe mid-20s, wore a name tag that said, Dylan. He looked nervous. "You Eli?" "Yeah." Dylan glanced at a clipboard, then motioned to a shelf. "Vest, gloves, hat, take a set." Elias reached for them, but Dylan stopped him. It's $50, man. Cash. That's what the foreman says." Elias froze. $50? For gear? Dylan nodded, not meeting his eyes. "He says it's rental insurance. Says we can get it back if we return the gear in perfect shape. But no one ever gets it back." Elias's stomach turned. "You guys don't get this stuff issued?" "No," Dylan said quickly. "He says the company doesn't cover it. He says it's our responsibility. If we complain, he cuts our hours." Elias pulled out the cash quietly and handed it over. Dylan shoved it in a lockbox and gave him the gear. An hour later, Elias was on site packing up fresh lumber with another guy named Mateo. They worked fast, moving 2x4s off the delivery truck onto pallets. Mateo looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You always this quiet?" Elias asked. Mateo gave a short laugh. "Don't talk too much here. Foremen don't like it." "Yeah? What's his name again?" "Walt. Walt Derry. Been running this site since it opened. He's a jerk, but if you stay out of his way, you might get a full week's hours." The rest of the morning went by in a blur of lifting, hauling, and hammering. Walt barked orders but did little actual work. Mostly paced, yelled, and blew a whistle like he was coaching a football team, not managing a job site. During lunch, Elias sat with a quiet kid named Trevor who was eating crackers out of a napkin. "No lunch today?" Elias asked. Trevor shrugged. "Didn't make enough last week. Gear payment hit me hard. And Walt cut my hours, 'cause I asked for a new pair of gloves." Elias had to look away. His jaw tightened again. Later that afternoon, Elias caught a conversation between Walt and another worker behind the porta potties. "You want more hours, you gotta pay for priority," Walt said. I pick the guys who respect the system. If you whine about gear or hours, I'll find someone else. Elias felt rage crawl up his spine. He kept quiet, kept working. But he knew what he needed to do. That evening, he sat in his motel room, hands shaking as he dialed the district manager's number. "Hey, it's Eli Rowe from Site 12. I need to talk to you." "About Walt?" The man on the other end sighed. "Yeah, I've had a few calls, but nothing with proof." "You got something?" "I'll have it tomorrow," Elias said. He looked at the hard hat on the table. $50 for safety. In a company he'd built with his own hands. Tomorrow he'd bring a camera. And then he'd bring the truth. Elias arrived the next morning before dawn, parking a block away. The camera was small, clipped inside the collar of his shirt and angled just enough to catch conversations. He'd slept maybe 3 hours, replaying everything he'd seen the day before, piecing together how something so ugly had taken root under his own company's banner. The crew shuffled in slowly, shoulders hunched, eyes down. No one greeted each other. No banter. Just quiet resignation. Elias joined them by the flatbed, while Walt paced near the office trailer, chewing sunflower seeds and spitting shells into the dirt. "Trevor," Walt called, pointing toward the scaffold. "You're with the roofers today. Don't fall. I'm not doing paperwork for another broken wrist." Trevor didn't answer. He just pulled on his harness and headed up. Elias noticed him wince as he hoisted the tool belt. Someone had swapped out the padding for a thinner strap. Elias kept his head down and started framing with Mateo again. Mateo said nothing, eyes fixed on the wood, but his pace was off. His left hand trembled slightly when he reached for the nail gun. "You all right?" Elias asked, voice low. Mateo didn't look up. "Did a double shift at the warehouse last night. Gotta cover rent." "You working 2 jobs?" "3. But the store cut my hours last week." He wiped sweat from his temple. "Walt don't care. Says if I'm tired, I can always give my spot to someone hungrier." Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. The camera caught it all. Around mid-morning, a delivery truck pulled into the site. The driver got out and motioned toward the back. "I've got the insulation bundles and copper pipe need someone to unload," he said. Walt didn't move. "That's not my job," he shouted. "You want it off. Tell them to hustle." He pointed at Elias and Dylan, who was carrying plywood nearby. "New guy and clipboard go play dock worker." They spent the next hour unloading heavy rolls in the heat. Dylan's shirt darkened with sweat. He dropped one of the copper coils and flinched, expecting to be yelled at. Elias bent down to help. "Been here long. 2 months. Got a kid." This was the only job that called back. Dylan wiped his face with the back of his glove. "I don't care about the money. I just want it to be fair." But every time someone says something, Walt cuts their hours or makes them do cleanup all day. Elias glanced toward the trailer. Walt stood inside, sipping something from a foam cup and scrolling on his phone. Not watching, not working, just waiting. Later that afternoon, the crew was called over for a safety briefing. Elias joined the line. Someone had fallen from a second-story frame the week before, and the company's insurance had flagged it. Walt stood in front, holding a stack of papers. "All right, listen up. We're gonna walk through the new harness policy. But I don't want to hear whining about it." He waved a sheet. "You sign this, you're responsible for your own gear checks. Don't come crying to me if you mess it up." One of the older workers, a tall man named Reggie, raised a hand. "These new harnesses, are we supposed to pay for them too?" Walt narrowed his eyes. "If you want the upgraded ones, yeah. You got a problem." "I've been in construction 20 years, Reggie said. "Never paid for safety gear in my life. That's the company's job." Walt stepped forward. "Well, maybe it's time to adapt. You don't like it. I've got 15 guys who'd take your spot tomorrow. Elias watched Reggie's jaw tighten, but he nodded and stepped back. The air stayed tense the rest of the day. Work slowed. A few of the younger guys moved like they were afraid to make mistakes. Elias saw Trevor trip over a loose board near the scaffolding and catch himself just in time. No one laughed. No one said a word. At break, Elias sat on a concrete slab behind the trailer. Dylan joined him, sipping water from a cracked bottle. "There's no shade on site," Elias said. "Walt says it makes people lazy," Dylan replied. "OSHA says otherwise." Dylan gave a dry chuckle. "Yeah, well, around here, OSHA's just a word he throws out when he wants people to shut up." Elias leaned back, letting the camera pick up every word. "Ever report anything?" "Tried once." Anonymous tip line. Week later, Walt somehow knew. Started giving me cleanup duty every day. "Why not quit?" Dylan shook his head. "I got a record. Nothing serious, just dumb stuff from years ago. Hard to find work that doesn't ask 100 questions. This job's the only thing keeping my daughter fed." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The camera had what it needed, and so did he. The breaking point came just before the shift ended. Mateo was moving a wheelbarrow full of rebar across uneven ground when one of the wheels snagged on a loose patch of gravel. The whole thing tipped, and the metal rods scattered. One clipped his shin, drawing blood. Elias rushed over. "You all right?" Mateo nodded, biting his lip. "Just scraped." Walt stomped across the site. "What the hell's going on?" "He tripped," Elias said. "The gravel's uneven." Walt didn't even look at the ground. "You break company property, you're paying for it." That wheelbarrow wasn't cheap. "Are you serious?" Elias asked. Walt stepped closer. "You got a problem, new guy?" Elias stood. "Yeah, I do. You're threatening a worker for getting hurt on a poorly maintained site. That's illegal." Walt's face twisted. "You don't know how things work here." Elias reached up and unclipped the hidden camera, holding it out. "I do now." Walt stared at the device, confused. "My name's Elias Rourke. I own this company." The silence that followed was absolute. Walt blinked. "What?" "I built this company from the ground up. And I spent the last 2 days watching you exploit, threaten, and humiliate every man on this crew. That ends now." Reggie stepped forward. "Wait, you're the guy from the newsletter? The founder?" Elias nodded. "Yeah, and I've seen enough." He turned to the crew. "This man," he said, pointing at Walt, "is terminated. Effective immediately. He will not set foot on this site again. I'll be conducting a full audit of every paycheck, every hour, every gear charge. Anyone who's been shorted will be compensated." No one spoke. Trevor leaned against a stack of lumber, stunned. Elias looked around. "You deserve better. And from now on, you're going to get it." Walt opened his mouth, but Elias cut him off. "You're done. Leave the site. Now." Walt hesitated, then stormed off toward his truck, muttering under his breath. Elias turned back to the workers. "Tomorrow, I'm bringing in a temporary foreman from central office. We'll take the day to walk the site, fix unsafe areas, and talk about what you need. No one works until we fix this." Mateo sat down heavily on a cinder block, finally breathing again. Elias turned to Dylan. "You got records of those gear payments?" Dylan nodded. "In the shed." He kept a log. "Good. We'll use it." Reggie stepped forward again. "You really gonna fix this?" "I didn't come here to play dress up," Elias said. "I came to see the truth. And now that I have ya, we're fixing it." He looked around once more. Faces that had been hollow that morning were now watching with something else hope. Elias took a breath. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something better. And this time he wasn't leaving it to chance. By 6 the next morning, Elias was back at Site 12 this time not as Eli Rowe, the temp, but as Elias Rourke, the man who signed the paychecks and owned the company logo on every hard hat. The crew arrived slowly, unsure what to expect. No one touched a tool. The silence wasn't fear anymore, it was cautious anticipation. Elias stood near the trailer with two men from central office. Malcolm, a senior foreman with 20 years in the field, and Jada, from compliance and safety. Both had been briefed late into the night and flown down before dawn. Elias waited until everyone had gathered. "I'm not here to give a speech," he said. "I came to fix what I allowed to rot. That starts today. No work until this site is safe, legal, and fair. Malcolm will walk every corner of this ground with you. Jada's going to review every equipment policy and safety protocol. And I'll be here, all day, watching, listening, and learning." No applause, just a few nods. That was fine. He wasn't here for applause. Malcolm stepped forward. "We're starting with a walkthrough. I need 3 of you who know the site inside and out." Reggie raised a hand. So did Dylan and a wiry guy named Marcus, who hadn't spoken much the day before, but now stepped forward with quiet confidence. Elias pulled aside the rest of the crew. "We're setting up a shaded rest area behind the trailer with water, chairs, and medkits. You'll rotate through safety refreshers and one-on-ones with Jada. This isn't a delay, it's us investing in your ability to stay healthy and alive on the job." He didn't wait for agreement. He just nodded and moved. By mid-morning, the walkthrough exposed more than Elias expected. Loose rebar piles, cracked scaffolding clips, and a complete absence of fall protection anchors along the southern frame. Malcolm documented everything with photos and notes, his tone clipped but professional. "This frame wouldn't pass a county inspection," he said. Marcus added, "Walt used to say the inspectors were lazy and wouldn't climb past the first floor. So we just made the bottom look clean." "Not anymore," Elias said. "We fix everything. No shortcuts." Inside the trailer, Jada was poring over paperwork. A stack of unsigned safety waivers sat in a drawer, along with an envelope of petty cash receipts. One stood out: 18 cash payments labeled PPE rental, totaling over $900. Elias stared at the numbers. He was collecting this from the crew? Jada didn't hesitate. "With no receipt trail. That's theft." Elias stepped outside just as the sun reached its peak. Mateo was sitting under the new canopy, sipping water. Elias walked over and lowered himself into the chair beside him. "You good to talk?" Mateo nodded, slow and cautious. "I didn't know about any of this," Elias said. "That doesn't excuse it, but I need to understand how it got this bad." Mateo's voice was hoarse. He started small. First it was just, "Bring your own gloves." Then it became rent or go home. He'd tell us it was company policy. Said headquarters didn't cover anything. We didn't question it. "You ever try to report it?" "I did. Once. Sent a message through the app portal. Never heard back." Elias frowned. "That system's supposed to flag anything involving workplace safety or pay issues." Mateo turned toward him. "Maybe it did. But Walt handled the work phones. He'd go through the messages before anyone else saw them." Elias stood quickly. "He had access to the site logins?" Mateo nodded. "He said he needed them to manage the load." Elias walked straight to the trailer and called Jada over. "Check the digital access logs. If he intercepted worker complaints, I want that verified." She was already pulling up the platform on her tablet. "If he filtered or deleted messages, it'll show." While Jada worked, Elias stepped outside again. Trevor was leaning against the side fence, arms crossed, staring at the dirt. Elias approached him quietly. "You're good with heights, right?" Trevor turned. "Yeah, My dad was a roofer. I was on ladders by 13. I saw how fast you caught yourself yesterday. That was sharp. You saved yourself a broken leg. Trevor shrugged. I just didn't want to end up like the guy who fell last week. Elias hesitated. Did you know him? His name was Luis. Good guy. Quiet. He slipped on a loose board. Walt made him finish the shift with a sprained wrist. Said calling out would cost him the week. Where is he now? Quit. Said he was moving to Arizona. Don't think he had another job. Elias gritted his teeth. Did Walt ever log the injury? No. Said if Luis kept quiet, he'd forget the gear fee. Elias nodded once and walked back toward the trailer. He found Malcolm reviewing the scaffold blueprints. Walt's gone, Elias said. But the culture he installed isn't. I want a new on-site supervisor here by Monday. Someone from within. Not a transplant. Malcolm looked up. Someone the crew already trusts? Exactly. They both turned as Dylan approached, holding a clipboard. We just finished inventory. Found 3 boxes of unused safety harnesses. Still sealed. Elias blinked. Where were they? Buried under old drywall in the back of the shed. Jada stepped out of the trailer. Walt deleted 7 complaint messages from the portal. All were flagged safety violations or wage concerns. He used the site admin login to clear them. Elias took a long breath. We report everything to HR and legal. No shielding. He turned to face the crew, who had started to gather again as word spread. All right, he called out. Here's what comes next. This site's shut down until it passes full inspection. You'll be paid your full wages during the downtime. No one's missing a check because of what he did. A few heads lifted. Elias continued. Second, the gear fees are being refunded. Every cent. Jada will handle the disbursement. If you paid anything out of pocket, you'll get it back. He pointed at the trailer. Third, we're replacing every unsafe tool, every cracked board. This site will meet every safety standard in the book and then some. Reggie raised his hand. And what about management? Who's running this place now? Elias didn't hesitate. I'm staying through the weekend. After that, Malcolm will oversee a transition to a new foreman. Someone local. Someone who's earned your respect. Dylan stepped forward. You really think one good foreman's gonna fix all this? No, Elias said. That's why we're not just changing the person, we're changing the system. He looked around at the crew. From now on, all complaints go directly to central office. You'll have a private channel with no middleman. And every site in this region is getting an unannounced audit. This wasn't just bad luck. It was negligence, and I take full responsibility. Trevor crossed his arms. And if someone like Walt tries it again? Elias looked him dead in the eye. They won't last a day. Silence followed. Not the heavy kind this time. The kind that came with people processing something new. Hope. Elias turned back toward the shed. I'll be here all day. If you've got something to say, find me. I'm listening. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't expect it. What he wanted, what he needed was to make sure no one on his payroll ever had to pay for their own safety again. By Monday morning, the gates at Site 12 were locked. Not by order of punishment, but to give the crew something they hadn't had in months. Time to recover and start fresh with pay. Inside the temporary office trailer, Elias stood at a folding table reviewing the final audit report. Everything matched the field notes. Missing safety anchors, falsified expense logs, unauthorized deductions. Legal was already drafting the termination notice for Walt's contract. Along with a formal report to the labor board, the company would be absorbing the fines which Elias had already signed off on. Outside, Malcolm and Jada were walking the perimeter with 3 candidates from within the crew. Each had been nominated anonymously by their peers. No one was told who voted for whom. The goal wasn't popularity, it was trust. Elias stepped out to meet them just as they returned from the final walkthrough. Malcolm motioned toward one of the candidates. He's the only one who flagged a structural inconsistency on the west frame without being prompted. Trevor stood with his hands tucked into his belt loops, watching Elias approach without shifting. "You feel ready?" Elias asked. Trevor didn't rush to answer. "I know the work. I know this crew, but I don't have a management background." "Good," Elias said. "That means you'll ask questions instead of pretending you already know everything." He turned to Malcolm. "Let's start him as acting foreman. 90-day evaluation. Full support staff. No solo decisions." Trevor's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I was serious the moment I saw you catch yourself on that scaffold. You don't wait for someone else to fix things. That's what this place needs." Behind them, the rest of the crew was filtering in under the shaded area. Water jugs had been swapped out for coolers filled with electrolyte packs. Small changes, but ones that mattered. Reggie stood at the edge of the group, arms folded. Elias walked over. "Got your refund processed," Elias said. "Should hit your account by this afternoon." Reggie nodded. "Appreciate that. But it's not just the money. It's the time we lost working under someone who never should have been in charge." "I can't undo that," Elias said. "But I can make sure it doesn't happen again." Every site foreman will now be selected through a 3-step vetting process, including peer interviews. No more top-down placements. Reggie raised an eyebrow. "You think corporate's gonna go for that?" "They already have," Elias replied. "And if they hadn't, I'd have replaced them too." The crew was called together for a final briefing before reopening operations. Elias stood at the front, not behind a podium, but next to the same folding table they'd used for lunch breaks. "You've been through hell. And the fact that you kept showing up anyway tells me everything I need to know. I failed you by letting distance turn into silence. That ends today." He looked at Dylan, who was standing near the back. "You were the first person who spoke straight with me. That took guts. As of this week, you're joining the safety compliance team. Part-time to start. Your job is to make sure no one on this site gets overlooked again." Dylan blinked, stunned. "You want me checking other people's work? I want you watching the people who are supposed to be watching out for you. You already know what to look for because you lived through it." Nearby, Mateo sat on a low bench, his leg bandaged from the rebar incident. He wasn't cleared for site work yet, but Elias approached him anyway. "We've got a materials coordinator opening. Less strain, full hours, better control over what comes in and out of the yard. You interested?" Mateo nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good. You start next week. Until then, you're on paid medical leave." As Elias moved through the group, one of the newer hires, Jasmine, a framing apprentice, raised a hand. "What happens if we see someone pulling the same kind of stuff Walt did? What do we actually do?" "You report it directly through the new field app. No middleman. Every message goes to 3 people. 1 from compliance, 1 from ops, and 1 from my personal team. And if you'd rather talk in person, I'll be here once a month. No warning. Just showing up." She lowered her hand but didn't look away. "And if someone retaliates, they're out. No warnings. No write-ups. Gone." No one clapped. That wasn't the kind of day it was. But the quiet was different now, measured, not muted. Work wouldn't resume until the safety overhaul was complete. For now, the rest of the day was dedicated to hands-on training with Malcolm and Jada. Instead of pushing plywood and hauling materials, the crew went station to station. Fall protection, heat stress response, harness fitting. Elias stayed on site, watching quietly. He didn't hover. He didn't instruct. He listened. At one point, Trevor approached him between drills. You think people like Walt are still running sites under your name? I know they are, Elias said. That's why I'm not going back to the office. Trevor looked confused. What do you mean? I'm stepping away from the executive floor, moving into field operations. I'll rotate through every region over the next year. No title, just a name on a roster. That's how we stay honest. Trevor looked down at the clipboard in his hands. It's gonna take a lot to fix all this. Then we'd better get started. By late afternoon, the final inspection team arrived third party, not affiliated with the company. They walked the site with Malcolm and Jada, reviewing the repairs and taking notes. An hour later, they handed Elias the paperwork. Site cleared for phased reopening. Safety compliance verified. Elias signed it and handed it to Trevor. Your crew. Your site. Trevor stared at the paper like it weighed 10 pounds. I won't let it slide. Not ever. I know. As the sun dipped lower, Elias sat under the canopy, alone for the first time all day. The sounds of drills and hammering were gone, replaced now by the low hum of quiet conversation and the occasional burst of laughter from the training stations. He looked down at the worn gloves in his hands. The same pair he'd rented just days ago. He set them on the bench beside him and stood. He didn't need them anymore. Not because the job was done, but because it was finally being done right.